that it goes if you move the cursor. Oh, there, it is on.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. So I probably should have explained at the beginning of the video that we're imposing on Ruth while her 3 children are in the other room. So if there's a few interruptions, it's called motherhood, right?
Yeah.
So we were talking about Winston's 11th wife being your
My
sister.
Yes.
And that's the younger sister or older
Yes,
sister?
Younger sister.
And she'd been living in Colorado City?
Yes.
And do you know what the circumstances were for her placement with Winston?
Crazy. They came to Canada for a visit during the holidays, and he was actually initially looking for women to marry the young man. Why he decided her? Well, of course we're cool people, but you know, why he didn't marry her to one of the younger guys and why he decided to marry her himself, that's all, who knows. Anyways, she ended up marrying him.
Was she just told by Rulon that she'd be marrying him?
Oh, it was, she met Wink and talked with him about getting married, and at the end of the day she married him. Long story short.
Okay. And how old was she at the time?
She was 19. She was probably 19.
And how many wives came after your sister? How many additional wives?
By June, we got 2 more sisters. We had a thing for sisters. I don't know. It was special. 2 more sisters. And then we had kind of a lull for about a year or so that we didn't get any more. And then we got 2 more sisters after that. And then a couple hodgepodge women. No sisters. They got married in pairs. A few older women that had already had their families and whatnot. And at the end of the day, he had accumulated 25 wives.
And what were the ages of the subsequent wives?
Well, he had, for the most part, they were over 18. Then after Rulon had his stroke, he married a couple of 15-year-olds. And they can stretch it however they want. They were 15.
And so they joined the family in Bountiful?
Yes.
And how did you feel about that?
I didn't like it. We were already struggling for time with him, feeling like that we didn't have enough time, let alone get 2 15-year-olds that are young and dumb, for lack of a better word to put it. It wasn't good times.
And when was that about?
That would have been 99, no. I want to say 99-ish. Yeah, it would have been around 99-ish.
And so eventually, though, Winston had about 25 wives, you said?
25.
And a couple of them were as young as 15.
Mm-hmm.
And is this how many wives he had at the time of the split, or was it by the time you left? Or
that was by the time of the split. When the split happened, then a few started tapering off. Like, I think he lost Jane right around the time of the split. He lost another couple that went back down to their families to do what Warren wanted. And then some of us, we just got tired of it, just left.
And how many children did you end up having with Winston?
I had 6 with Winston.
And does that include the child you had?
7 if you count my oldest, which he claims Wink is his dad, so.
And again, I'll just keep it to the split, the time of the split. Can you estimate how many children there were within the family?
I would, I'm going to say somewhere between 80 and 100. I want to say closer probably to 80 at the time of the split.
And more since?
Last count, 136.
And, I mean, that's a lot of kids for one father.
He loves them all. He can name them all.
But in terms of, I don't know, just day-to-day parenting, I'm just wondering how much time, in your observation, Winston was able to spend with any one of the...
You know, that's definitely one of the downsides in a family as big as Winston's, is that he doesn't have time to spend with his children. He loves them all dearly, cherishes each one of them, but there's just not enough time in the day to spend quality time with each child.
And it also strikes me as quite a difficult situation financially.
Depends on which way you look at it. If you're legal and you have child tax and you have a lot of kids, that can be good. If you're not and you have a lot of kids, it can be very stressful.
Was there a financial struggle for you and your family when you were in Bountiful?
Before the split, when his company was prospering, it wasn't too bad. After the split, he gave away half of his company to the Warrenites. I'll call them what I want. And his company really struggled. And that became a real challenge.
And again, I'll just, the split seems like quite a decisive event in that community, so I'll just stick to pre-split for the second when I ask you the question, and I'll get you to take us through the chronology. But before the split, Winston was still Bishop of Bountiful.
Yes.
And so he had the 25 wives and the close 80 to 100 kids. What was life like for you then, Ruth, in those years?
The part where Di and I, my sister and I, lived on a little farm by ourselves was fantastic. Couldn't have been better. I'd probably still be there if we still lived on a farm.
So you geographically were moved to
Yes.
a location away from the main Bountiful community?
Yes.
And it was just you and your sister that had married Winston?
Yes.
And your children?
Yeah.
And then you came back to the community at some point?
Came back to the chaos, which I didn't do so good. My sister and I were a little bit more strict in our parenting, and we pretty much had our children doing what we needed them to do. Very obedient, well as obedient as you can get and still be normal. Just like moving back into chaos. Total chaos. Disrespectful children, destructive children, mothers that it felt like really didn't care. So.
And you're talking about Winston's wives that were added after you?
Yeah.
And was that around the time of the split that you're describing now?
Actually, this would have been after the split. During the split, we had just moved out to the little farm, and we stayed out there for a couple of years. So we didn't move back to the chaos till 2005, I want to say.
What about before the couple of years that you moved out to the farm? Had things been functioning in a less chaotic manner back then? Or what was your life like before you went to the farm?
Well, the children are smaller. The women are not as cramped, because with each year you add on another 10 kids. I mean, or so, So I'd say for the most part we were all really trying to get along. And I think by then we'd kind of started to form our little, you don't want to call them cliques, but that's pretty much what it is, little groups of women that get along better together than others.
Within Winston's wives?
Yes.
I mean. Were you living out in the farm or in the community when the split happened?
We had, I was out at the community when the split happened, and we moved out to the farm shortly after.
And so when you came back to the chaos, that was in around 2004, 2005, if
Yes.
I got the years correct. And you mentioned earlier that some of Winston's wives had left after the split. Is
Yes.
that right?
Jane left. A couple of the other women left to go back down to Colorado City, down to their families. Susan left shortly before I did, I believe.
So some of them left to go back to their home communities, and some left the FLDS altogether.
Yes.
And did some become Warrenites?
The two that left to go down to the community, the one is married to a different man, and she's still out to Colorado City. The other one moved it to Colorado City for a while, and then she left after a year or so. She couldn't take it.
And so she's out of the community altogether now. And when Winston married all the subsequent wives, Ruth, the kind of 15 that came after you, how were you told in advance that the marriages were happening? Or?
Sometimes we were. There was a couple of times we weren't, and we were very angry women. By the time that happened, we were pretty frustrated. But it's the same thing as when he married the two sisters versus me. If you were placed with them, he didn't necessarily have to ask permission. Only in a case like mine where there's other circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And when did you leave the community? What year was it?
2006.
2006. And you moved down to Hurricane at that time?
Yes.
Can you explain to us, it's probably a complicated question, but as best you can, Ruth, what led to your decision to leave the community?
Pure frustration. I was pregnant for the 7th time, knowing that I was doing this again all by myself. Well, there was other women, but I really felt like that I wanted a relationship. And he pretty much had outright said that he definitely would not work on a relationship with any one of us. You just get frustrated and walk off. So when he sent me down here to do school and his lack of attention, I couldn't take it anymore. And it's kind of like I told my daughter, he broke my heart, so I left him.
So how much, I'm not asking you anything, you don't want to answer anything intimate, I'm just wondering how much time you'd actually get one-on-one with Winston.
Depends on if you're pregnant or not. And that was probably a huge part of, if I hadn't become pregnant, maybe I'd still be there. I don't know. I felt very neglected.
And so you moved to Hurricane to go to school?
It was Cedar City, Utah. It's close to here. And I did a semester of school there. Called it quits.
And were your kids with you at that time?
I had all my younger children, and I had my older children come down. They spent the first year here with me, and then my two oldest decided to move back.
Can you tell us what the ages of your children are right now?
I have almost 18-year-old son, lives with his dad in Canada. My daughter is 14 and a half, and she lives with her dad in Canada right now, but she'll be coming down to do school. 13-year-old son, he's going to go up and do school this year. 11-year-old son that's with me, 9-year-old daughter, 7-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old baby boy. Big boy.
Turning 4 next month.
Yes.
And your oldest son, the 18-year-old that's living up in Canada,
Yes.
has he expressed any interest to you in entering into a polygamous marriage?
No, I would be shocked if he did.
What about your daughter, who's 14?
Again, I would be shocked.
And she's going to come back down and live with you.
She wants to come to school and get her braces on.
And bearing in mind that I know we've talked about this, you can't control your kids, but what would your own personal feelings be if your daughter chose to be in a polygamous relationship?
I would not choose that for her. But I try to keep an open mind to what she wants. If she's old enough to make up her own mind, that in my mind being over 18, I'm still going to love her no matter what she does. I would hope that she's seen enough and that she would choose not to. But it's always a possibility.
Has she said anything to you so far that leads you to believe that's maybe where she's going?
No, thank God.
And so you've been living out for close to 4 years now, is that right?
Yeah, 4 years. In June, it was 4 years in June.
And so I should have asked you this at the beginning of the interview, Ruth, but how old are you now?
36.
36. And what have the last 4 years been like for you in terms of, if you can compare your life while you were still living in Bountiful with your life since?
Well, I still have to provide for my children. The biggest difference is I make the decisions, and if I make a wrong choice, I get to own it and live with it, and versus trying to do the very best you can and provide for your kids and having somebody else make your decisions, and then you say, why didn't I do what I knew I should have done? I am way more engaged with my children. I interact with them a lot more. I'm very, very happy with the decision I made. I love being independent, and I feel like I'm a way better mother, way better person, just doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm. And were those things that wouldn't have been as open to you back in Bountiful?
I had a few fights with my ex on what I thought ought to happen and what he thought ought to happen. More than not, he would win, simply because he was the head of household.
And that's the way that the structure worked in the FLDS.
Yeah.
And you don't adhere to the teachings of the FLDS religion anymore, is that right?
Definitely not.
Is that something that's happened since you left, or had you had a period of time leading up to the time that you left where you were questioning the
I had a
doctrine?
lot of questions before I left. A lot of things that just didn't add up. A lot of things I felt like were pure tradition. Stuff that had been handed down that I didn't feel like that, if God is a God of love, why would he make women suffer like that in my particular situation?
Mm-hmm. Like, can you give us an example of what kind of question, what sort of teaching you questioned?
Well, for one thing, I hugely question the teaching that you need to marry off young girls that aren't old enough to really know what they want. Every young girl goes through a rebellious stage. Well, for the most part, there's always the exception, but most children do go through a rebellious stage. There's no need to marry them off or do stuff like that. I question the whole idea of placement in marriage coming from God. I knew that wasn't so. So many things were about looks. If you looked a certain way, you got advanced, and you know. Whereas I knew a lot of good people that were better than a lot of people that looked good, but there was no advancement for them in the community, either business-wise or family-wise, as far as going on and enlarging their family. So I had a lot of questions as far as where everything came from, and a lot of the traditions that we were supposed to be following as far as the dress codes, and there's so many.
And would you, I'm going to ask the question anyway, can you ever see yourself in the future being in a polygamous relationship again?
Maybe reversed. Just kidding. No. Definitely not. I'm definitely a monogamist at heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing I'm sure of.
And so is it fair to say that what you, Ruth, wanted of a relationship you weren't going to be able to get in that sort of structure?
Not in that particular family.
And was it the number of wives and the number of children that made it so difficult? Or
I like to think so. I like to think he might have engaged had we stopped after me.
if you'd only had 10 wives?
I've seen men with smaller families do very well with their women.
Mm-hmm.
Take very good care of them emotionally and physically. So you look at the situation, one man and that many women, it's just impossible from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
So, I like to think that he did better than most men up to a point. His capacity, I think, is larger than most men's as far as his love for his children and what he's been able to do with his family. I don't think many men would be able to do as well as he has.
Do you mean in terms of providing
physically, and even though he doesn't spend time with his children, there's no doubt that he loves them. He does love each and every one. Even my son that he only sees a few times a year, he definitely loves him.
Mm-hmm. So the kind of one-on-one contact is missing, but you think the love is still there. And that's, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today, Ruth, knowing what's going on up in Canada?
I am actually very excited that there's going to be an answer one way or the other. However, saying that, I would really like the answer to be that the law not be upheld. Not meaning that I don't want underage marriages to be prosecuted, or that I totally agree with the whole polygamy situation, but saying that I really would like the people that want to do that lifestyle, if my daughter does choose that lifestyle, I would very much like her to be able to live it within the law. I would like her to have the ability to be proud and be a somebody, not just a plural wife, but a wife.
And so it's an experience that wasn't necessarily a happy one for you, and you just said you choose monogamy, but if there was truly freedom of choice that was presented to someone, those are the circumstances that you could accept that a polygamous relationship might happen.
My biggest fear is if the question is answered that the law is upheld, that you're going to be doing the very thing that you are supposedly fighting for. In talking with you and Leah, I feel like that you would like to see a decrease in, that the lawmakers would like to see a decrease in the polygamy and the underage marriage. I think if you answer the question to uphold that law, you might get your profile arrests and your profile prosecutions, but you will see an uprising.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll become a martyrdom thing, something that is going to happen because the law's against it.
So it drives it kind of further underground.
Oh yeah. The one thing that I can say about the polygamous communities now, for the most part, is they are becoming more open and more open to doing things so that they are above scrutiny. Whereas if you uphold that law, I think you're going to undo a lot of that openness, and it's going to become closed off again.
And we talked, I hope you don't mind if I bring this up, in our discussion before we turned the video on, we talked about Ruth's law.
My law. In my world.
And your point had been that the line that you would draw, and you've just talked about this now, is the idea that a polygamous marriage is something that's entered into by the exercise of free choice, and that for you that objective can be met by establishing a minimum age requirement for marriage.
Definitely.
And Ruth's law.
In my world,
it would be, you said it would be 21.
in my world, knowing what I know about the people involved in polygamy, if there was an established legalization or law that you could be a polygamist, it was a life choice, but you had to be a certain age, and I would say 21, because not even a girl at 18 is mature enough to enter into a plural situation. Because I've lived it, I know. 18-year-olds are too immature. They don't know what they're getting into. And that takes care of the whole choice, because once you become that age, you should be mature enough and know what you want. Be able to choose that for yourself.
So the importance you're placing on the freedom of choice, you in your mind, that's equated with a minimum age then?
Yes.
Sorry, did you want to add to Ruth's law?
Yes. I feel that establishing some kind of boundaries would actually make it easier to prosecute the people that didn't want to make it a choice, that wanted to pervert the whole idea of polygamy. To me, the underage marriage is a perversion of the idea of what polygamy ought to be. When it becomes a choice, that means the person is an adult and they are knowingly making an educated decision. In my mind, that's not any different than choosing a religion that you would like to live and become a part of. It's a lifestyle choice.
So you, Ruth, may not necessarily agree with the polygamy prohibition in the criminal code as we have it now, but in your mind it just should be replaced with a different regulatory structure.
If you can't prosecute it, what good is it? And if you do be able to prosecute it, but it does the very thing that you claim you're trying to fix, what good is it? That's where I stand.
Sort of the utility of prosecution in your mind is the
I
question.
feel like if you answer the question to not support that law, but to put something in place with boundaries, you would have successful prosecution of the people that want to pervert that lifestyle.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add to Ruth, or do you think we've covered the points that you wanted to make?
I think I've covered pretty much everything that I'd like to say. I mean, I might not choose that for me. All my experiences were not bad. There is a lot of love in that family. However, saying that, it was very hard. I choose not to do it. It's a choice for me. I would like every single person, from my children to that entire family, to be able for it to be a choice for them. And I feel like having that not supported and being able to put things in place that they could become wives instead of plural wives would actually, some people, it would give them the freedom to stay. For some, it might give them the freedom to leave, but at least it would be a choice, one way or the other.
Sorry, that occurred. One last question I had for you, because we talked about the marriage covenant earlier and the time and eternity. So you've left the community, you've left Winston. How does the FLDS view your marriage to Winston now?
Well, according to the old version that I grew up with, I belong to him for time and eternity. However, saying that, I know God loves me and he wouldn't do that to me.
That part of Ruth's law too?
It's part of the Church of Ruth. Welcome to the Church of Ruth.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you very much for your time today, and for your children's patience in letting us talk to you.
Well, thanks for coming, and hopefully this will be a positive role in whichever way it goes.
Well, we'll let you know the answer when we know it.
All right, thanks.